안녕 친구들. I hope you've been well. I know some of you are very surprised to see me, but I had a little bit of time tonight after work, and so I thought I would come on here, recap for you episode 13 because I have seen episode 13. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I plan on doing 13, 14 recaps pretty briefly, make them really brief. Because I know that the English subtitled videos have been out there for a week or so, brief recaps and then spend a little bit more time on my musings. And yes, I know you guys are seeing me in pigtails. It's really hot in Southern California, so hence the pigtails. Anyway, episode 13 picks up with Kang Chi's voiceover narrating, and he says he asked me, referring to Lee Sun-shin, and then we flash back to Lee Sun-shin's conversation with Kang Chi, and Lee Sun-shin asks, what do you want to do with your life? And then we hear a glimpse of that conversation, and then Kang Chi continues, and then I asked her, why are you so good to me? And then we hear Yeo Wool's response. Well, the next morning, Yeo Wool is trying to convince her father, let me train Kang Chi and take care of him, make sure nothing, bad happens because of him. And of course, Tam Pyong-jun says no. For personal prejudices and things like that. And then he says Kwon's gonna actually be training Kang Chi and taking care of Kang Chi. And both of them, Yeo is like, no, you can't put Kwon together with Kang Chi because all they do is they want to fight and like get at each other's throat. And surprisingly, Kwon agrees and says, Yeo-rashi is correct. I would end up just fighting with Kang Chi. And so he says, let us be co-trainers. And so we then see this scene where Kang Chi is on the veranda or one of the little patio, open air, I don't know what you call it, a porch or a veranda. And then Yeo brings this huge sack of beans, and she tells him, hey, this is part of your training to become human. We're going to teach you patience, and you have to count all these beans. And so it's this hilarious series of scenes where Kang Chi's trying to count, and he gets to like 1,000 something, and then Yeo keeps trying to ask, so have you ever wondered about why your parents abandoned you or left you? And it totally throws him off, and he has to start his counting all over again. Kang Chi says, I've never been interested in people who have abandoned me. Well, later on in the episode, though, when Yeo does fall asleep, and there's this really cute scene where she falls asleep and then he catches her with his little finger, right? But he puts her head on his shoulder, and then he says, he confesses, thinking that Yeo is asleep. In all honesty, I have wondered, but there's a part of me that hasn't really thought about it a whole lot because I'm afraid that once I start thinking about it, I'll actually start to resent them, right? And then he thanks the sleeping Yeo. He says, but Yeo, I do thank you for asking. And it's just this really great moment where he's able to share a little bit more about himself. And of course, Yeo opens her eyes to let us know that she is hearing everything and that Kang Chi's confession has not fallen on sleeping ears. Well, on the flip side, Tessa is in a meeting with Tam Pyong-jun, and I think, it's the kitchen master and Kwon. And Tam Pyong-jun gives him this little wooden marker with a chrysanthemum. And he says, your father asked me to give this to you. And we then flash back to Tam Pyong-jun's conversation with Park Mus-sol. And Merchant Park had basically said, if anything happens, I want you to give this to my son and have him take my place as one of the four masters. And so it turns out that Tessa is one of the four masters now. His father was one of them and has now passed that torch, I guess, proverbial torch to Tessa. But, with that marker then is also relayed, heartfelt message of how much he loves his son and how proud he is of him and so on. So afterwards, later that evening, Tessa and Kang Chi are talking underneath the moonlight. And Tessa says, do you think my father knew about your identity? And Kang Chi's like, I don't know. And one thing leads to another, and Tessa asks, "Do you love Yeol?" And Kang Chi, in the spur of the moment, was like, "Yeah, of course I love Yeol." And then he catches himself. He's like, "Oh no, no, I don't love Yeol. Not in that way." But Tessa's like, "It's okay." He's like, "If you feel, a certain disloyalty to Cheongjo, don't." And he basically then tells Kang Chi that to think of Cheongjo as someone from his past, which is so incredibly heartbreaking because, for a brother to have to say that about his sister, and Kang Chi has no idea what's really happened with Cheongjo. So, but yeah, so that's kind of what happens, and Tessa then says, "Hey, you know what? Quit feeling so obligated. You don't have to protect me or my sister anymore. Just because of some promise you made to my father." And Kang Chi's like, "Hey, you're the only family that I know. Of course I'm gonna protect you." And there's this kind of squabble between the two, as Kang Chi insists on protecting his family, and then Tessa's like, forget about us. And because Tessa knows, just what their circumstances are like and how, they're definitely not going to be helping, Kang Chi. He feels more than anything else like they're a burden to him. Well, in that evening, the shrubberies die, and of course we have then evil Wol Ryung come back to life, and we know he's evil. Why? Because his eyes flash red, and all the greenery around him dies. And so, if Kang Chi as the Kumyo has the powers of regeneration, of bringing to life something, which Wol Ryung used to have. Remember how he used to be the caretaker of the mountain for that 1,000 years and so? Well, now it looks like the reincarnated Wol Ryung is now the Kumyo who brings death to everything around him. So, anyhow, during this whole thing, though, Wol Ryung ends up killing some people. And it's kind of weird. He's like a key sucker. And as he sucks the key or the life force from his victims, his body starts to regenerate. So I guess it's his way of trying to get younger and back to kind of his old fleshy self, if you will. Well, while this is going on, though, some of the soldiers are gathered around, and they're, concerned because they don't trust Kang Chi. They don't want to be there with a half, beast and half human, right? So they're kind of arguing, trying to decide what to do. Well, back at the brothel, Cheongjo is now getting lessons from Soo Ryun, who is the headmistress. And she's being told, strike softer. Your hands have to be like butterflies and things like that. And I think it's Wol Sun, the veteran prostitute or the courtesan, comes in, and with her little entourage of courtesans, and she picks a fight, basically saying, to Soo Ryun, how could you overlook me and train this little novice girl, your, famed 5 drums? How could you pass that skill on to her and overlook me? And Soo Ryun at first totally ignores her, and then when Wol Sun just creates such a fuss that, Soo Ryun can't, she then turns on Wol Sun and says, "There's a reason why. You only wanted to learn the 5 drums as a way of making yourself more attractive to men." But she, But Soo Ryun then says, Cheongjo generally has a desire to learn the drums, and so that's what she does. And so what she does is she tells Cheongjo to continue to practice, and then Soo Ryun leaves. Well, when Soo Ryun leaves, Wol Sun, the veteran courtesan, ends up kind of creating some tension, and she slaps Cheongjo, because Cheongjo had said, Wol Sun, can you leave? And then Wol Sun slaps her. Well, what Cheongjo does then is slaps her back, which kind of shocks everyone. And she said, Cheongjo says to Wol Sun, "The next time you touch my face, I'll make sure that your face, I'll rip your face out, off," basically is what she says. And then she goes back to practicing, and, Wol Sun just kind of leaves. Well, this definitely marks the beginning of Cheongjo's change, right? We knew that she had changed, but and then she's left there still practicing her five drum, drills. Well, Soo Ryun is then talking in her bedchambers or private chambers with the head servant, and the head servant, wonders to her and to herself, what do you think happened that night to get Cheongjo to want to become a kisaeng and want to learn the five drums and all of this stuff? And Soo Ryun just very wisely says, don't you hear what's going on? Don't you hear her crying? She's crying inside, even though outwardly she looks fine. And of course, we see Cheongjo practicing her drums. Well, we go back to the more idyllic little couple. Kang Chi has fallen asleep while counting his little beans, and Yeo kind of peeks up and she sees him, and so she goes like this to make sure he's asleep. And then she's about to kind of go like this and poke him in the eyes. And of course, Kang Chi wakes up in time. He thinks that it's an attack, and he flips her onto her back. And there's this kind of cute little moment where he, teases her about saying, are you sure you're supposed to be this famed martial arts trainer, because you seem really weak to me and all of this stuff, right? And Yoda's like, let me up. And of course, he just keeps teasing her, and so she grabs his arm and she bites him. And then, Kang Chi's like, ow. And she tells me, hey, next time I won't be quite as gentle, And so there's just this little playfulness, and they're kind of looking at each other and they're kind of joking around and things like that. And then that's into this little intimate scene. Song, the little kitchen boy, he comes running in saying that there has been this murder. Okay, and we then flip to the mountainside where a lot of the villagers are gathered around. There's already an investigation going on, and So Jung, remember the monk, happens to see this, and he's now really disturbed by the state of the corpses. Well, when Kang Chi actually goes out into the courtyard of the academy or the military training camp, the other soldiers want him gone. They want to try to kick him out, saying, hey, you did it. And they're basically accusing him of doing all those murders, and they ask, where have you been the past few nights? And one soldier even goes and kind of grabs Kang Chi by the shirt, and they're about to fight. And into this little tense scene, the kitchen master comes in, and he says, "What are you doing? Do you have proof that Kang Chi has been the one doing all these murders?" And that throws everyone off, and all the soldiers are kind of like, no." And the kitchen master then looks at the head guy and he says, "I'm surprised by your behavior. Kang Chi just wants to be human and live like a human, very much the way many of you did. Isn't that why you guys are here at the academy?" And so with that comment, you then get a realization that a lot of the soldiers are here because, or at the academy, because they really had no place to go, and this was their one way of having a decent life. Well, as Kang Chi leaves that group, Kwon kind of leans against a little pillar, and he just asks Kang Chi, he's like, "Why don't you just tell them the truth?" And Kang Chi turns back and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you scared me." And then he swears Kwon to secrecy, saying, "Do not tell Yeo," right? And Kwon's like, "Fine." And of course, as soon as Kwon turns around, who should he see except Yeo, right? And Yeo's like, "So, what is the secret?" And she kind of wheedles it out. It's so cute, her and Kwon's interactions. Anyhow, Soo Ryun gets invited to visit Chogonung at the 100-Year Inn. And she does that, and the woman is really incredibly gutsy. I'll talk a little bit later about how much I love that woman. But Cho Gonung basically says that he has a special guest, and he would like Soo Ryun to actually perform her five drum performance at the Lantern Festival that they're going to be having soon. And so Soo Ryun reluctantly agrees, and later that night, Kang Chi goes out into the forest to do his nightly scouting, because apparently he and Kwon have been kind of patrolling the woods to try to figure out who's been doing these murders. Well, one of the hot-headed soldiers follows Kang Chi, trying to figure out what Kang Chi is doing, and hopefully in the part of the soldier to try to find proof that Kang Chi is the one killing all these bodies. Well, thankfully for him, Kang Chi, meets up with him, because Wol Ryung was chasing this guy, the soldier guy. And so, thankfully, when Wol Ryung actually comes face to face with the soldier, Kang Chi happens to be there, and Kang Chi kind of, pushes the guy behind him, and Wol Ryung backs off when he sees the bracelet on Kang Chi's wrist. And so, Kang Chi's kind of like, what the heck is going on? He doesn't know, but at least he's seen now a person or creature in the woods. And Wol Ryung, for his part, goes to visit So Jung, the monk, and So Jung kind of senses Wol Ryung's presence, or he knows that someone is, in his house. So he goes into his library, and lo and behold, there is Wol Ryung. And so So Jung's like, is that you? And, Wol Ryung says, yeah, it's me, Wol Ryung. Well, the next morning, so we don't really know what happens at this episode between So Jung and Wol Ryung. Well, the next morning, Kang Chi goes to have breakfast, and it's literally like that cafeteria with the social pariah, the outcast in one corner and the rest of the kids in the next. But all the soldiers literally are pushed to the end, and they push Kang Chi's little portable, eating table to the far, end of one, of the mess hall, or the, eating area. And literally, the soldiers move even farther away, and then one even like slams his spoon down and he walks out. Well, what's really cool is that the soldier who had been in the forest with Kang Chi that night and knew that Kang Chi wasn't responsible for those murders, he courageously gets up, moves his table, and plunks it down opposite of Kang Chi, and without another single word, he proceeds to eat. And there's this really great sense of camaraderie between Kang Chi and the new soldier. I think it's Soldier Kim, who I actually saw episode 14, and something bad happens to him. But anyway, they eat, and there is a sense of Kang Chi finally, having one person in the group of soldiers who's on his side. Well, what's kind of cool is, as Kang Chi's dealing with that, Yeo Wool is so cool. She's so cute. She had a dress made, and she opens it, and it's like this really nice, pretty hanbok with like embroidered flowers on the jogori, which is the top. And she's like this, and she's so excited. And she grabs she sacks her hanbok up in a silk, silk cloth. And then she goes to ask Kang Chi, who is still counting beans, whether he is busy and whether he wants to go with her to the lantern festival, because she wants to go light a lantern and make a wish. And so basically Yeo Wool is asking Kang Chi out on a date, right? Gutsy Yeo Wool. But anyway, so Kang Chi's like, okay, sure. And Yeo Wool is like, okay, bye. And during that time, though, what was sad was that great moment between Kang Chi and Yeo Wool asking Kang Chi to meet her at for the Lantern Festival and all that. It's juxtaposed by image of Cheongjo officially becoming a kisaeng. And so you see her hair. And in Korean culture back then, virgins had their hair down. And then once you were no longer a virgin, you were married or you were a kisaeng or whatnot, you would then pull your hair up in kind of a head crown, or a headdress. So that's something for those of you who aren't familiar with older Korean customs, why some people have their hair down and in braids, and why some of the women have their hair wrapped around their heads. Well, anyway, there's this really very tragic scene, because Cheongjo literally embraces pretty much the life of the kisaeng. There's this official writing of her name in the book of kisaengs and stuff like that. And Cheongjo, it's so sad because she changes the meaning of her name, Cheongjo. And her, the name that her father had given her was full of hope and innocence and things like that. And then she changes it to a different meaning of Cheongjo. And with that, Soo Ryun says, you have now officially become a kisaeng. Well, it turns out that Cheongjo has been selected to be the Flower Gisaeng. So she gets to wear this little flower bonnet thing, and she's going to be leading the parade of kisaengs to the 100-Year Inn as they celebrate the Lantern Festival, and she gets to ride on a horse and all of those things. So it's supposed to be a great honor among kisaengs, but of course Cheongjo is not that thrilled. Inside she is just crying. Well, Kang Chi hears about what's happened with Cheongjo because remember her Cheongjo's personal maid. She runs over to Kang Chi because she heard the news that Cheongjo has been elected as the Flower Gisaeng, that Cheongjo is now officially a kisaeng. So she runs to Kang Chi at the academy and says, Kang Chi Oraboni, which is an older way of saying Kang Chi older brother or something like that. But anyway, she says, Kang Chi Oraboni, I thought that you of all people should know. And then she explains to Kang Chi what Cheongjo has become and what's going on. So as Cheongjo is being led down one of the streets, basically through town, you hear all the town villagers murmur, and Cheongjo very stoically ignores or tries to ignore the whispers. But basically all the villagers are, saying, oh my gosh, isn't that Merchant Park's daughter? And oh my gosh, she's become a, courtesan or a prostitute, and they're just appalled and, saddened by it. Well, what really hits home in terms of just the tragedy of her becoming kisaeng is that the servants of the 100-Year Inn, they come out and they hear the ruckus and they see Cheongjo coming in as the Flower Gisaeng, and their worst fears are realized, and they just return back inside the inn without even saying a word to Cheongjo, and they just say, oh no, Our Lady has become a kisaeng. Well, as Cheongjo gets down and she's about from her horse and she's about to enter the 100-Year Inn, Kang Chi shows up and he tries to talk with her, and Cheongjo basically says, if you have any business with me, come see me at the brothel. And she walks into the 100-Year Inn. And pretty much then Kang Chi is just thrown, and he loses track of time. He sits nearby the 100-Year Inn, just kind of lost in thought, trying to absorb all of the new, events that have happened in terms of Cheongjo becoming a kisaeng and all of this stuff, right? Well, while he's doing that, Yeo, poor little Yeo, is dressed very prettily. She's got her little hanbok jacket on as well as her hanbok, and she's in the where she said she was going to be, like, what is it, at the fork of one of the village streets, and she's just waiting. And it's pretty, I would say it's pretty light when she's waiting, maybe in the afternoon. And then you see many hours passing because it's nighttime by the time poor little thing, she's like seated on, sitting down on one of the little ledges, right? Well, she finally gets fed up, and I was thinking, it's definitely Yeo, because even though she's dressed like a little girl, she still kicks like a little tomboy, right? She kicks something and it ends up hitting an ajoshi, right? Or an older guy who's passing by. And she's like, sorry. Which is so cute. Yeo is so adorable. But anyway, Kang Chi, as he's walking numbly back, he sees a group of little boys with lanterns walking, and then that's when he remembers, oh my gosh, Yeo, and he takes off running to try to get back to that place where, not get back, but try to meet Yeo where they had said that they were going to meet. And it's so cute because Yeo is like, Kang Chi-da, right? And so she gets up and she's about to put her hanbok down, but in the process, Kang Chi ends up bumping into her, and so her whole entire hanbok jacket falls down. And then Kang Chi doesn't even recognize her, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, miss. And then he takes off, and it's not until she says, Kang Chi, that he stops in full shock, and then he looks back, and the episode stops with Kang Chi looking at Yeo for the first time as a girl. So that's how the episode ends. Now, I did want to talk about two musings that I really loved about this episode. One is definitely all the mentors that we have. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but if I have, I think it bears reiteration. I love the writing, and the mentors especially are able to they have so many poetic and philosophical wise sayings. Lee Sun-shin with his comments and his mentoring of Kang Chi, kitchen master as well, and then Soo Ryun, the head mistress, and how she is mentoring Cheongjo as well. And I love how all of them are so sensitive to that. The other thing that I really loved is 안녕하세요. The other thing that I really loved is the transformation of Cheongjo and how she goes from this innocent woman to now someone who's much more assertive. She's looking out for herself and trying to really forge a place. And she does so, trying to get back at Chogonung. And I love her will, her determination to survive. And I think really more than anything else, she really is a survivor, because if you think about what she's had to deal with, her father being murdered right before her eyes, news of her mother's suicide, and then being raped repeatedly throughout by her father's worst enemy. And if episode 2 with Seowa's servant, when, Seowa's servant took Seowa's place with Chogonung, if that's any indication, you have to wonder what Cheongjo's night had been like, right? But, instead of cowering, and I had talked about how I didn't like her aristocratic young lady, attitude about life and her whole die or live kind of, fatality. We see her totally different now, and she's really trying to forge a road for herself, even though inwardly she is just crying and there is just a lot of heartache as she has to leave everything that she's cherished to the wayside. So I think that's been really great. She was like the standout character for me in this episode. More than anything else, though, I think this episode marked for me definitely I guess a coming of age story arc. We see that with Kang Chi trying to figure out who he is, half beast or half Kumyo and human. But we also see that with Tessa and Cheongjo, and I think that is going to be a really great story to watch. So. Alright, that's it. I hope this made sense. I hope you were able to follow. I wasn't talking too fast or anything. So until episode 4, take care, and I will see you later. Bye!